it would be like my job to go and pretend I'm the enemy,
Yeah.
look at where we lived and say, this needs to get fixed, because they can do X, Y, or Z. So I wouldn't say I'm obsessive about locks, but like if you have a door that doesn't have a deadbolt, you need to get one.
What is the most intense military career activity that you were, ever involved in that you're allowed to talk about? Obviously, I'm sure there's things you can't mention. Welcome to Green Country Conversation, the podcast where we hear about the stories and learn about the people that make Northeast Oklahoma truly great. I'm your host, Maverick, owner of Bison Ridge Insurance, and today we have on a special guest who has spent his entire career protecting others, both on the battlefield and now in our communities. But first, let's take a minute and say thanks to our sponsors.
Hi there. This is the point of the podcast where I'd like to thank our amazing sponsor, but we don't have one yet. If you're a business owner and you're interested in sponsoring the Green Country Conversations podcast and getting your business information out to hundreds of listeners across the Green Country area, please reach out to me. My email is maverick@bisonridgeinsurance.com. Let's avoid this awkwardness next time.
Joining us today is Andrew Impson. Andrew is a retired U.S. Army Green Beret and founder of Legion Security Solutions, LLC. With years of specialized military training and multiple deployments across the Middle East, Andrew has transitioned his expertise into security consulting, helping businesses, schools, churches implement proactive security measures that can save lives. From emergency planning to active threat response, his mission is to provide knowledge that empowers individuals and organizations to stay prepared. Andrew, welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you here.
Thanks, Maverick. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to first just say, thank you so much for your service. It's guys like you who allow guys like me to sit in a desk and sell insurance all day. So I really appreciate the service that not only you, but I'm sure your family had to make and the sacrifices. So thank you so much for doing that for us.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure, man. And then also, I'm very excited for this conversation because I'm actually on the security team at church. Now, what that means is not much, right? But I think that the conversation that we have is going to be impactful for me because it's stuff that I do weekly. We've done a couple security trainings with our church. They've had people come in and train us and just like kind of preparedness for like our specific situations. And it's very interesting to me that whenever you're talking to someone who has a mind like yours, who's trained and geared towards these things, the things that come up that you don't even think of, right? Like we were sitting in the gym area of our church. And he's like, how many exits are in here, right? And I think a majority of the room said 2 because there's 2 main exits. And there was like actually like 4 because there was like an emergency exit and there was like an exit that he saw out. Now they're not common exits, right? It was like climbing scaffold, you know what I mean? But he was like, you have to think about it. And so like for me, I was like, well, I would have legitimately never thought about that. So it's cool to be able to have these conversations. Yeah. So let's get into some rapid fire questions here. I'm really excited to hear your answer to this first one because it makes me laugh every time I hear it. I've heard it on other podcasts and I'm excited to ask it for you. So here we go. Would you rather fight 100 chicken-sized T-Rexes or 1 T-Rex-sized chicken?
Rooster or hen?
Oh man, that's a good caveat. Let's say let's say hen because roosters are they're vicious.
I'd go with a T-Rex sized. Well, I don't know. Actually, now that I think about it, even a hen, I guess 100.
Yeah, 100. You just kick them.
Yeah, kick them, run them over.
Yeah,
because
that's awesome.
You might scare her, but might step on you.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, what is your go-to fast food place and order? Do you have like a fast food place where you got to go? Even if you're a health freak, you're like, man, if I'm feeling like I want to eat something, fatty and greasy, where's your go-to place?
Honestly, well, I've got Alpha-Gal, so if you know what that is,
I don't know what that is.
It's a tick-borne illness. It makes you allergic to meat.
Oh my gosh.
So for me, there's really not much fast food that I do anymore.
Yeah, that'll stop it for you, huh?
I would say maybe Burger King if it was if I could have it, yeah.
Right, yeah. Man, that's crazy.
Yeah.
If you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be? Your younger self.
Oh man, I think I was just talking about this with somebody. To look how everybody, to never think that somebody's thinking like you're thinking. Always look at it from their perspective. So then empathy, I guess, but like understand that not everybody's going to see things your way, and that'll help a lot of issues, whether it's leadership or anything. Just
That smooths over a lot of situations, right? Because I think as men in general, we automatically think, oh, the way I think is the way everyone's wired. And then specifically when you get married and you have a wife, you're like, holy crap, that person does not think
yeah.
anything like me. So that's a great piece of advice.
Mm-hmm.
What is and I'm curious to kind of hear this. What is the most intense military career activity that you were, ever involved in that you're allowed to talk about? Obviously, I'm sure there's things you can't mention, but first thing that, like, if someone's like, hey, you were in the military, what happened? Like, first thing that pops in your head, what is something you think of?
Oh, intense. Well, I mean, I would guess I would say probably combat. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
one of the trips to Iraq or something like that. That's
Yeah.
kind of. I mean, I've done quite a bit of stuff, but
Right.
as far as intensity, I mean, it kind of varies on whether it's against an enemy or you're doing training or whatever. So,
Right.
I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's probably all sliding scale, right? Because your level of intensity that you probably were experiencing changes. It kind of it almost gives you like a ruggedness to it, to where you're like, this isn't as intense. Whereas like someone like me, I would be like, the littlest thing probably isn't. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's interesting to hear those different types of things that have happened.
Yeah, exactly.
If you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be?
Oh man, that's a good one. I want to say Jesus off the top of my head, but
That's good.
but I also would probably say maybe one of the disciples,
Yeah.
just to hear it from a different perspective.
Right. Yeah, that'd be crazy. Yeah, because those guys are the guys that were living and walking it every day, and I think hearing it from that perspective would be very, very interesting.
Yeah.
What's one thing you think civilians misunderstand about security and preparedness?
I think about this actually quite a bit, and I don't know that's a misunderstanding. It's more of just not knowing. You don't know what you don't know, and
Yeah.
so to try to be proactive in it is really good. But you may miss something, like you were talking about the exits. You may miss something that you just don't even know or know to think about. So it's it's not necessarily everybody has to be a security professional. You can. That's why guys like me are kind of into the.
Yeah.
So yeah, you'll miss things if you don't know what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think that's really big. My father-in-law just told a story about him and my mother-in-law were hiking, and it ended up being harmless. Nothing happened, but he was like, there was this car that it came by, and then they slowed down, and all of this stuff. And he made the comment. He was like, my mother-in-law. He was like, she would have been kidnapped and in India before she even realized what happened, because just people are just wired to like not know. And like I said, it ended up being nothing. It was actually someone who goes to church with us, and they were excited to see them. And so it's just funny how I think how important that is that you're kind of talking about, right? Just being kind of always prepared, and like you said, not that everyone has to be a security professional, because just like me, I don't want every single person to be an insurance professional, because then I'd have no job. But you gotta have to have an understanding overall of the topic, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's good. If you could train alongside any elite military or law enforcement unit in the world, which one would it be?
Oh wow!
And let's exclude the Green Beret, because obviously you're a part of them. So let's exclude them from this conversation.
Oh man, I don't know. I don't even know. I would say something like Delta, because of their level of proficiency at certain things. But then you've got some other countries have some really interesting stuff that they do too. Jungle warfare, things like that. So I don't know. I don't know. That's all I got, I guess, for that one.
That's a great one. I think that it's cool to think about how, and obviously very limited knowledge here, but what I do know is that there's different, units that probably are really, really good at certain things. Like you mentioned the jungle warfare and stuff. So it would be cool to be able to see all of the stuff that you could master from, if you were able to jump around from unit to unit and train, that would be really cool.
Quite a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet so. What is one item you always keep in your car for safety? Let's exclude firearms, because I feel like that, is pretty surface level. Like a lot of people kind of understand the importance of having that. Like if there's one thing that you're like, hey, I don't ever, have this not in my car, what would it be?
If defense is one thing, and then I will always say tourniquet at a bare minimum.
Yeah.
I have a med kit, but a tourniquet would be bare minimum because I have several
Yeah.
in my truck, but I will have at least one wherever, for sure a tourniquet. Just because
Yeah.
there's a lot of different things. Only one thing, that's tough. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, because, you might not always get in a knife fight, but you might come upon a car wreck that you need to help somebody with a tourniquet.
Right.
Or
Yeah. I don't know where I heard this at, but one, the guy that I did the training with for our church, he said tourniquet as well. I think this question came up, and he was like, it can be used in so many different situations for so many different things, and like you said, it's ultimately life saving if you run into a car. But something else I heard the other day, and I don't know where I heard it, but a guy was talking about how he always has a fire extinguisher in his car, and he was like, because you don't realize like how often you may run into like not your car but someone else, like you're kind of talking about, you run up on a wreck and you can go out and help them, and I was like, I would have literally never even thought of that. So I thought that
I have
really
one in my
good.
truck too.
That's probably a smart thing. I should probably add one to my wife and I's vehicles.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get out of these quick questions and jump into some industry talk here. I want to talk about your transition from military to security consulting. Let's start with an overarching question. What led you to start Legion Security Solutions?
So this was, I had several jobs lined up, and as kind of right whenever I was getting out, or right after I got out. But I kind of realized that I didn't want to, I guess, simply put, that I didn't want to waste all the skills that I had developed because I can use those for something else. And so me and a couple other guys that were retiring at the same time, a couple of the Green Berets, we talked about the school-based incidents that are constantly happening.
Yeah.
And how we could maybe do something, So one of them actually did get into that as well as me. And so we talk about it all the time, but the skills that I developed as a Green Beret in the Army, it translates to security, whether it's residential, churches, or schools, really well. A lot of the, from planning to just tactical movement in a building, it just translates. So I always, want to be able to help people and not kind of waste what I have done, for over 20 years and just turn that into something else, kind of redirect it.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. I think that, I mean, you can't have probably asked for better training than what you had, right? And it's like, you, not only did you have the training, but you also lived it. Like, and I think there's, in any industry, regardless if you're, in security or if you're in, I don't know, a doctor or whatever it is, I think that living it is a little bit different than actually, because you can read it in a book and you go through training and all that stuff, but then like to actually live it real world, like I think that you probably can bring a lot. You're like, because you can think back to things that happen and be like, oh, I remember this specific situation and how we handled that. And I think that's really impactful and a big benefit that you bring to your business. And you kind of already spoke on it, but how did your experience as a Green Beret shape your way of approaching security consulting?
So the biggest thing, and I've kind of tried to work on, because I'm not very good at selling myself or marketing, and so I'm trying to like explain what makes it, why I'm good at this and why, I should help. So one of the main jobs that I did was you have to look through the eyes of the enemy, right? So you have to understand, you have to analyze the enemy, you have to understand their tactics, their capabilities, their weapons, and, you have to, we call it red teaming or red cell. You have to pretend that you're the enemy and go against yourself. And how are you going to do that? And when you do that, you identify weaknesses in yourself, and you're able to, bolster your weaknesses and improve on what you're lacking against the enemy. So kind of taking, it's not terrorism anymore. It's, burglars or something that's going in to hurt people, and either in a church or a school. And so understanding what they do, their tactics, how they maybe do something helps. It's really, you don't ever want to say that I'm pretending to be a criminal, but that's kind of what it is. Right. You have to understand them to a level that you can look through their eyes and say, this is what I would do. And so I would go through this door because it's unsecured. And so you need to fix that door now, right? Is that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And I'm sitting here thinking I think it goes back to our last question in this one, that I think that there's going to be a big difference in the way you approach and the way your brain works versus someone who maybe has always just been and this may be a stupid example, but has always been a tough guy, has, worked as a, bouncer at a club. And then he's like, well, I'm going to get into security. And then he sees, as the opportunity to work with churches or schools. And I'm just saying that because I think that you're like, what you're saying is you're literally trained to be able to get into that, whatever the threat's mind is and be like, hey, this is how I would approach it. And it's because you've done those repetitions, so many times with your training. So I think that's really impactful.
And we also,
yeah, go ahead.
It's kind of like I'll talk about vulnerability assessments real quick. That's what we would do to our own, literally like we would do that if we occupied a building and that's where we lived.
Yeah.
It would be like my job to go and pretend I'm the enemy, look at where we lived and say, this needs to get fixed. This needs to get fixed because they can do X, Y, or Z. So, I mean, it's a real world application too.
Right. Yeah. No, that's really big. And so we've talked a couple times about the benefits of the Green Beret training. I would be curious, just because I think this is interesting, what has been the biggest challenge in shifting from the military operation to civilian? Because I would imagine there's things that like you said, it's not terrorism anymore. And obviously it could be, right? And we don't want to say like it couldn't be, but like a lot of times, like you said, it's working with, people who are worried about burglars or something like that. So what's been the biggest shift or thing that maybe you didn't expect to shift from being in the military world to now the civilian world in this sense?
I think that again, kind of going back to you don't know what you don't know. So a lot of times getting people to understand that you do need this, you do need somebody to come in and evaluate your emergency operations plan because
right.
It just might not hit home because, especially we're rural. A lot of the communities out here are rural, and that it can't happen. It can't happen here is said far too often because it definitely can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's one of the biggest challenges because in the military, the Army, it's like we know it's a mission. We're going to do it. It's just what it is. But here it's kind of different. So you still have to do the training and all that, but it might not be taken as heavily as it should.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. I would imagine that there's a barrier of entry you have to go through with civilians that you probably don't have to in the military, just because of the sense of like the military, everyone is already probably in that mindset. Like you're saying, they understand it's a mission, but even if you're getting into the military, I'd imagine that like your brain is automatically kind of thinking about like what could happen, like even if you're, like I said, I'm speaking very naively here because I was never in the military, but like, even if you were a cook in the military, like you're still like things could happen, you know what I mean? And like, whereas if you're a civilian, like you said, it's easy to be like, oh, I live in Coweta, Oklahoma. Yeah. It's never going to happen here when it definitely could. Right. Exactly. How do you balance training clients to be prepared without creating fear and paranoia? Because I think of like even my wife specifically, and this isn't your exact business, but our mutual friend, Ben Noble, obviously firearms training. Like there would be a lot that would have to go into my wife before she would even go into a class because she would feel paranoid and feel fear of it just because of like, it's almost like you said, you don't know what you don't know. And if you open that door and walk through it, then you're into a world where you're like, oh, this is a possibility now because I had this training. So how do you balance that with your clients? Because I would imagine that's something you do have to work through.
Yeah, and I guess understanding that with schools really is the biggest thing because I'm very against drills that scare the kids. And a lot of people that do stuff like that. And, you do a lockdown drill and there's people that are faculty or whatever. They're like banging on the door and act, trying to get in and stuff. And I don't agree with that. So that's something that I'm very aware of. So it's really trying to make it to where it's necessary, it's needed, but just kind of walking people through to like, this is going to help you be better prepared and not scaring them with the training, so like, Ben would be a great, if you're going to talk about firearms, that's a good example because he's very good at understanding where somebody's at and not, yelling at a student or something. Very understanding of this might be the first time you've shot. So it's kind of the same thing, not that I do employ some stress inoculation with one of my courses, the tactical emergency casualty care course. But that's later on. And if it's too much, it's too much, but I think it's good to have a little bit of stress, but it's not like, I'm not trying to scare anybody. It just kind of raises your
Right.
pushes your stress levels up a little bit, so you can have experienced that before, because you might not have ever experienced it before. But if you the further you go up in stress, the more you can handle, if that makes sense. So
Right. Yeah. It's like working that muscle. You got to work that muscle that like can handle it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is
No, that makes complete sense. Yeah. And it sounds like, I mean, it sounds like it's going to be, you're going to meet them where they need to be met, right? And like not push it too far. And I think that's really important with this stuff, because ultimately, like if you're someone who doesn't have a brain wired for this kind of stuff, then I think it automatically creates a level of stress that you're going to have to like work through as like the instructor, right?
And I take that into account. And, something that adds stress is time. Just putting somebody under a time limit will add stress that you don't need to do anything else. Or a competition or somebody viewing you. That adds stress that you have to work through, but it's not like scaring you. So
right.
Those are
yeah, no, I think that's really big. And like I even think back to when we were in school, they would do the shooter drills or active, lockdown drills, and they would come and like pull on the doors and bang on the windows and stuff. And like it's almost like I would imagine there has to be some level of like you said, creating the stress, but also not overdoing it, because then I do vividly remember one time we went into lockdown and it wasn't a huge deal, but we were in lockdown. And then like, granted, we were like freshmen, so everyone is dumb as a freshman, right? Like you're just an age where you're stupid, but everyone just assumes it's a drill then. And I would imagine you're always having to walk that, like you want to create the stress, but you don't want to overdo it to where everyone just assumes it's always not a big deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. And that does happen. Yeah. I think that there's so much that goes into this. I mean, not understanding that it's not a drill, and that goes on to the school. Like you've got to announce this is a drill. And if that's not announced, then it's not a drill. But a lot of times, these incidents happen and they think it's a fire drill and stuff like that. That's happened several times. And that's on the school to have that pre-planned and discussed before it happens.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's talk a little bit about particular security measures that everyday people can take. Because I think this section of the conversation will be something that a lot of our listeners can pull a piece of nugget out and, actually apply it. I think that there's a difference in listening to a podcast and then listening to a podcast that has like implementable things that you can do in your life, right? And I think this will be something that they can take. So what are some of the biggest security vulnerabilities you see in schools, churches, and businesses, just in general?
Well, so a lot of it comes down to a culture. And I would say the biggest vulnerability are doors. Obviously, that's the entryway, but locking doors.
Yeah.
Whether it's a church, a school, or a home, a lot of people don't lock doors. And I know that's, we like to think of, back in the day, we didn't always lock our doors and whatever. That's where we live in. So, you've got to lock doors. And once you're once you're at home at night, lock your doors. Make it a routine. And it kind of, I know it does. You don't want to be over stressed about this, but just make it part of your routine. Church the same way. Sometimes, whoever's managing the keys is not very vigilant about it, and doors might get left open. I know doors get left open. Same thing with schools. They might, prop open a door or whatever. And beyond that, it's the way it's made. You have to look at your locks, and that's one of the things I do. I wouldn't say I'm obsessive about locks, but do you have a deadbolt on your home? If you have a door that doesn't have a deadbolt, you need to get one. That's one of the main things I'd say. If you don't have a deadbolt on one of your doors, that's the most vulnerable, because I can use a piece of trash to get into that door, and it's too easy. So schools, all the classrooms should lock from the inside, on and on. But the manufacturer, the way it's made, the type of door, the type of lock is a pretty big deal, because some of them are pretty easy to get by. So that's what I would say. Definitely lock your door.
Yeah, that's crazy. And you don't even I'll probably say that I've said this multiple times. I probably will say it again. But when you don't have that security mindset, you don't even think about that, right? You're I have a door. It has a normal lock on it. It's no big deal. And you just said, I could get into that with a piece of trash, which is like,
An old water.
holy crap, because yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I will say, like, something I think like our church is really good at is we the security team like knows like at a certain time we lock all the doors and they stay locked. I think the only one that stays open is like the front door, and that's something we're really vigilant about. But I do know, yeah, I think there probably are a lot of churches who don't do that, and even like specifically with like schools, like my son, so my wife's a teacher here in Cuida, and I know they're making changes to where like each school has like only one entrance that's open, and it has to go through the office. Whereas like I think like there's schools in the district that weren't originally built that way. Like you could go in the front door and not get by, you know what I mean? And so I think it's really cool to see that schools are making a shift towards that. You know what I mean?
And that, hopefully there's somebody advising them on that more than, and like I said, definitely don't want to put anybody down, but like if you're doing it on your own, you might not understand it, like you don't know what you don't know, but also look at something every day. Like, maybe you've got an old truck that you have to jiggle the keys to get it to start.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even think about it anymore. That's just what you do. But somebody else tries to do it and they're like, why isn't this starting? Broken lock that that you've got to pull on the door and it'll a certain way and it'll open. You don't think about that until somebody else comes in, like myself would go in and say, this needs to get fixed. And then it's like, I don't even think about that anymore because it's been like that for years. So different view.
Yeah, that's good. I think that having a different set of eyes on it, especially a set of eyes that's been trained, is going to be way more impactful than just you going through and doing it yourself. What are some simple steps that the average person can take to increase their personal security? So I think like what are something that the everyday person could do on a day-to-day, like you said, adding in making sure you lock your doors to your routine. Like what are some simple things that they don't have to be incredibly trained for that they could apply to their life?
So I have two. One at home is be friends with your neighbors, not necessarily friends, but be civil to your neighbors. Because if you're nice to your neighbors will look out for you and they'll be nice to you.
That's good.
Be like, hey, there's somebody parked outside of your house, or are you expecting company? I know you're out of town.
That's good.
So that expanding your reach from not just your property line, but out will help you. Neighbor down the road, call and say, hey, something's going on over here.
That's cool. Yeah.
The other thing is stay off the phone when you're out in public. It's such a thing, but I have to, I'll glance at my phone occasionally, but I won't walk across a parking lot or into a store looking at my phone just because you might get sucked into some whatever Instagram, whatever you're looking at, and walk right into a problem. So that's the main thing that I think a lot of people kind of miss. Stay off.
And I think that's huge because that's so innocent and so easy to fall into, right? Like you're like, oh, I'm not I'm not walking through a bad neighborhood or whatever, but like any neighborhood that you're nose down into your phone, not paying attention, you could, walk into something. I'm very, very, I try to be diligent about that. And I'm sure I do it more than I even realize that I do, even knowing I try to like make sure I don't do that,
Yeah. Even getting into your car, I mean, you at least have to lock the doors before you get back on your phone. If you're in a parking lot, somebody could watch you with your head down in your phone, and then you go into the car, and then they can open the door and grab whatever.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, definitely. What do you think the most overlooked aspect of emergency planning is?
I think collaboration. I work with a company called Stratasite that does this really good. They do collaborative planning. It's really for schools, but churches as well. Getting law enforcement involved and saying, hey, this is what our plan is. What are you going to – so our plan is this if there's an incident. What is your plan? What is it going to look like when you show up? Because there's a lot of friction. So law enforcement will arrive if there's an incident, but maybe they haven't been there before. Maybe there's not a plan in place.
Yeah.
So that can create some chaos. So having prior planning and involving different elements that are going to show up is a big thing that's overlooked, especially.
Yeah. I think that's huge because of course I keep bringing up our church, but I'm just talking specifically because I do it with them. But like even something I wouldn't have thought of is like we have counts for our church that, you know, the security team is over, and it's because we want to make sure that you know, like if there is an emergency and everyone gets evacuated, we could tell the, you know, either the fire department or the police, like, hey, there were, you know, around this many people, and it's not going to be perfect, right? But at least gives them a number that they should be kind of looking for.
Yeah,
And I think that that's something that our church did really well, is we brought in the local police department and had them come in and kind of talk about like, hey, this is what should happen when we arrive. So, but like you said, you don't know if you don't know.
Right. And so I just one more real quick one is knowing the address of your location. So if you're at a church, you need to know the actual address, because you might name, they may not know, dispatch might not know where that's at or whatever. So an address, you know, have it taped up somewhere.
And I think that's big for everyone, right? Because like even like like I think, like you said, going back to like being on your phone, like I think our phones make it to where we like, oh, I could just hit my location on my phone or whatever and know. But like, and not that you and I don't know if you agree with, I mean, I don't think you have to know your address at all times. Like if you're at a you know what I mean? But like having just a general sense of like, hey, this is where I'm at, you know?
Something I say is like, if I'm doing, and this is something I always put in, like if I'm doing a vulnerability assessment, if you've got a first aid kit, like hopefully it's a trauma one, but if you've got like a first aid kit, have the address laminated, put inside of there. And you can have,
that's good.
You can have instructions, a cheat sheet, take that laminated piece of paper and call 911, and then you can, this is my address, you know, this is what's going on, that type of thing. But
that's really good. Like I have 3 young boys, and I think that would be really impactful for them to be able to be like, hey son, this is, you know, a packet we can have at our house. That's like, not that we ever leave our kids at home, but you know what I mean? Like, you just never know. Like, and you need to be prepared for that stuff. Cause that comment I just made, like, oh, we never leave our kids at home. And then the one time you do and something happens, you're going to wish you did, you know, did the preparation.
Well, it's also like, you know, you teach your kids. I mean, I know I've drilled in our address, our home address, just in the worst case scenario, if something happened, I split up somewhere, they can tell the police, this is what my address is. You know, it's
at least they know where to go look for home. You know what I mean? Okay. Well, you've mentioned the vulnerability assessment a couple of times. I would love for you, and obviously I understand it's your business, and so I'm not expecting you to give us all the nuts and bolts of how you process this, but give us a general overarching view of like what that looks like if someone comes to you, you know, if that's a school or a church or however you want to attack it, but, or even just a personal, you know, one, but what does it kind of look like? What are the main parts that you're looking for on that vulnerability assessment?
So I kind of, I'll start with the outside, and I kind of work my way in. You know, I go through, there's different D's for security: deter, deny, defend, delay. You can add a bunch of them, but I usually just use the 3. So deterrence, I look at, do you have a fence? Can you afford a fence? I know fences are expensive, but if you have a fence, you have a gate, you close the gate. Close the gate.
Yeah.
That's another tip. Keep your gate closed, because
you know what always cracks me up, just real quick, because my wife and I just talked about this the other day, is when you see the houses that have the gate on the driveway, but then it's open on each side.
Yeah.
I'm like, I know that probably does deter, obviously car, but like ultimately, like I like you said, fences are expensive, but I just think that's funny.
I know. Yeah. That. Well, and you know, you can always get by most gates, you know, but it will stop somebody that's just looking for an easy grab.
Right.
So those different layers. So I look for layers.
But the big thing, like you said, right? If you have a gate, close the gate. Like I think that's big.
It's a pain. I get it, but I close mine every single time I leave. You know, I also, you know, I have a beware of dog sign, because I do have a dog that's a protection dog that it's also liability for them. I'm trying to keep you.
Yeah, for sure.
Like if I let my dog out, I can't have to guess. I live out in the country. I can't have to guess that somebody's in my yard or my, you know.
Right, exactly.
But,
yeah, that's good.
You know, I'm looking for lights, looking for cameras and security systems, you know, security like alarm systems. And then I've developed a method of kind of identifying what's the most vulnerable entryway. And it doesn't mean that that's the one that's going to get, if somebody's going to break in your house, that doesn't necessarily mean that's it. And this kind of goes across schools, churches, and residents.
Right.
But I'll look for the most vulnerable, and that's the one that needs to be addressed first, and then you work your way down. So looking for
Right.
entryways, do you have valuables out? Is there, like at a school or a church, is there a glass door that can just be broken with a brick? And then you can just unlock the door or something like that, and then
Yeah.
those are the main points of it, right? Kind of looking at all that stuff. Inside is really just different, residents. It's not so much inside. There are some things I look at, but churches and schools, you look at, do you prop the doors open? Is this door broken? Can I just push it open, or
Yeah.
use a credit card to open the door? That kind of thing. So that's really what it's
Yeah.
about. It kind of comes. It looks kind of like a home inspection report once it's done. I'll have
Yeah.
all the issues identified and then recommendations on how to fix it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, with some maybe some hardware stuff that you can do. Call a locksmith and have, I recommend security film for glass fronts on doors. So I've got a guy that in Broken Arrow that I recommend for that. I'll call him.
That's cool.
Stuff like that. So yeah.
That's awesome. So like, let's say someone's listening to this, or a church is listening to this. Are they able to call you and just have that? Like, because I don't know if it's an overarching part of like a course that you do, or is it like, can they just call you and say, hey, we want to have a vulnerability assessment done on this location?
Yeah, and that's a separate thing. I recommend that being part of the rest of it. Like, that's the base thing that you should start with, because you can identify vulnerabilities and use in the church or the school or whatever. But yeah, I can do that completely separate. But
that's awesome.
I do think that's like a baseline. This is where you start, because you've got these issues. So now, how are we going to mitigate those issues?
Right. No, I think that's really, really big. Let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about the importance of knowledge and the readiness. We've kind of touched on it already, but you said in our pre-interview package that you're passionate about giving people knowledge that can save their lives. Why do you think education is so key to security?
Well, I mean, it kind of just goes back to what we've been talking about. You need to know what you're looking at to know there's a problem. And then, not everybody needs to have that built-in mindset or trained. I don't train, because you do need the training, but like, I don't expect a teacher they don't become teachers to be worried about this stuff, or to become a gunfighter or anything like that. So, that's one of the main things, is just getting that knowledge and education, so you kind of, know what to look for. Like, what's the difference between cover and concealment? That's a big thing. One hides you, one stops bullets, but you need to know the difference. I don't necessarily expect all teachers to know that.
Yeah.
But you get that education, now I'm going to hide behind this brick wall if there's some sort of issue. Right.
No, that's really big. I mean, we've said it multiple times, you don't know what you don't know. And there's no way for you to know it unless you have someone like you who's trained to come in and kind of help you. I think of it all the time, like you need someone to come in with a second set of eyes, because sometimes it's really, really hard to see the forest from the trees. Like, and if you're not trained from that, you're not even going to be able to do that at all. So having someone come in that's like, hey, this is, like you said, I think that what you said in the vulnerability assessment, like identifying the one specific, like, most vulnerable door is really important, right? And you're not saying that this is like, you can't predict the future. You don't know that this is the one they're going to come in. Yeah. However, you're saying, I think that this is probably somewhere you should start with. And I think that's really important for them to know.
Right.
What's one training or skill set you wish everyone had? Like, if you could say you have a magic wand, you're able to wave it, every single person has this one skill set or training process that they've gone through. What do you think it is?
I think trauma first aid, and to an extent CPR as well, but because both of those can be used really in any. It doesn't have to be this mass casualty horrible thing, a car wreck or something like that. But I think putting a tourniquet on, knowing how to put pressure, bandage a wound, manage an airway, and that's one of the things that I teach. But I think that's very important, because you'll most likely use it in a car wreck as opposed to some sort of terrorist attack or something. But it translates to both. So might as well get that training for a terrorist attack, and then you can still use it in Walmart, or somebody cuts their hand in the kitchen or something.
Yeah, like I think it's important for everyone because the grandma that's going to Walmart and the guy that's a security officer at the church could use that training in both situations, right? And that's kind of what you're saying.
Yep. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, that's
a
awesome.
chainsaw accident. You
Yeah,
want to know how
right, exactly.
to treat that.
For sure. Yeah, definitely. So I think that it's important for you, like we kind of already talked about this a little bit, but managing expectations and mindset for these things. Because I'm curious how you help organizations prepared for the worst case scenario, but also keep that positive mindset. Because I'm sure that there are situations you could go in and point out 50,000 things that could happen. You know what I mean? But you also don't want to make it to where like they're afraid to open their doors at all for people to come in. So how do you kind of manage that positive mindset while showing them what could happen?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of just talking through it really is the biggest thing, and kind of saying, kind of like I was just saying, you've got, if you're training for the worst case scenario, you're going to be able to use all of those skills in a less worst case, like a
Right.
less disastrous scenario. So kind of just putting that into perspective, I think helps. We're talking about using tourniquets if you get shot, but you also can use a tourniquet if somebody bumps into a old glass window and it
Right.
cuts their hand.
Yeah.
So just having that awareness of, because it's not always, talk about like hot zones and warm zones and cold zones in a threat. It's not always just a shooting. It can also be a car wreck if the car's on fire,
Hmm. Yeah.
or whatever else. So kind of putting that in perspective, I think helps a lot.
Yeah. And I think that something we've talked about throughout this whole thing is just having the plan and knowing what the plan is, right?
Yeah.
Because like it'd be different if you were to just come in and point out everything that could happen and then leave.
Yeah.
But you're going to come in and point everything out that could happen or the worst case scenarios. And then also, like you said on your vulnerability report, give, solutions and hardware and everything. So it's like, yeah, I'm going to point out the things that could happen and I'm going to open your eyes to these things, but I'm also going to make sure that you know how to, at least address them. Right.
That was a better answer than I gave. That's pretty good. Yeah. I mean, yeah, because it is finding solutions for what is potentially there. Don't
Yeah.
that's kind of my motto is don't wait for a problem, find a solution. Right? Don't wait for it to show up and be an incident. Find the solution before it happens. And planning is huge. So I think planning alleviates a lot of stress from people too. If they've got a plan, they know the plan.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what I think. Because like if I do feel just about anything, right? If I feel like I'm overwhelmed, like just writing down a plan of like what needs to happen is very, very helpful. And I think that's relatable to emergency situations as well.
Definitely.
So what's next or what's the big thing on the horizon for Legion Security Solutions? Like do you have any plans of like starting a new training program or a training program that you have just released that you are wanting people to know about? Like what's kind of going on with your business right now?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to pick it up a little bit more. I need to get out a little bit more and talk to people about this stuff because really one of the biggest things that I want to reach out to is private schools because public schools have the state doing a lot of the security type stuff.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that I couldn't help in a lot of instances,
Right.
but private schools sometimes get left behind. So, yeah, I mean, vulnerability assessment, the tactical emergency care, casualty care course, I've got one for law enforcement, I've got one for civilians, and then kind of an active threat response training that I can do as well. But yeah, I'd like to probably start picking up a little bit more. I haven't reached out to too many private schools, so that's one of the main things because I worry about them getting left behind. And it's also churches. I think that working through, and I talked to Ben about this, and then one of the other partners that I work with, who's law enforcement, is getting a church security
That's good. Yeah.
together, and it's pretty much everything I've got already. It just needs to be kind of repackaged.
Fine tuned.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's really, really big. I know that like, for our church, like we've had security for quite some time. We kind of had an instance and nothing bad happened, but we had something come up that really kind of geared us to starting it. And over the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. It's kind of fine tuned.
Mm.
But having a company like yourself that, like you said, that has all these programs that can bring it in and say, hey, this is what needs to happen, I think is really big. And especially because we live in an area that everyone's kind of familiar with guns, and everyone's, we're rural enough that I think people are automatically thinking like, hey, it couldn't happen here. But unfortunately, the truth is it could, and so we need to have those conversations.
And, having weapons is a whole nother thing, because you have to address that as well. And understanding weapon manipulation and that's you can look at some of those.
That's a whole nother conversation.
It is, yeah. And there's if so like my ideal thing right now would be for a church would be a vulnerability assessment, and then the TECC course that it's not just the putting on a tourniquet or a chest seal, it's scenario based, and it's running through some weapons manipulation, understanding your target, what's behind it, and kind of angles, and where, when you shouldn't be shooting and when you should, that kind of thing. That's a more in-depth course, but
right. Yeah. No, that's all really impactful, right? Yeah. And it all has real life, repercussions for all of those decisions, I think. So it's important to have that conversation. Let's shift gears again. I know that a lot of, and this is, you may not be, I don't know if you have this or not, but I think a lot of guys who are in this world, in your world, are, and I like technology and gear, so that's why I'm asking this. I think a lot of guys are gearheads. And so what is one piece of gear or tactical survival that you swear by, that like you always have on you? And like I said, let's not say firearm. Let's kind of like be more specific, because there might be people who aren't comfortable carrying a firearm, but might be comfortable, carrying a tourniquet in their car. We kind of already touched on this, but like, what's that one specific thing for you that you feel like you swear by? And maybe it's a brand of knife, or maybe it's a, whatever it is, but like, what's that one thing that you love and you have to have with you?
I definitely carry a knife at least wherever I'm at, even if I'm running.
Yeah.
I'm, again, out in the country, so sometimes dogs are chasing you and whatever.
Yeah.
I carry a sock pea dagger.
Okay.
You'd have to look it up. It's a pretty good knife, but that's I think probably the best defensive knife it really doesn't take a whole lot of training to get good with it or used to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely a tourniquet. Just a first aid bleeding control kit is great. Trying to think of,
is there like, let's say you mentioned earlier, like a first aid kit for your car. What are some things that we need to make sure are in our first aid kits? Cause obviously we mentioned tourniquet, but like, if you were like, hey, these are, the 5 or 10 things that need to be in a medical kit for it to be kind of complete. And I'm sure you could go really, really broad here, right? Cause there's always so much more, but like, essential, what needs to be in an essential medical kit?
So it goes down the March algorithm. I won't go down the whole thing because that'll take a little while, but look that up. But yeah, tourniquet, some sort of bleeding control. So a tourniquet at a bare minimum, a hemostatic gauze that you can pack a wound, some sort of pressure dressing. I'll try to keep it simple. Chest seals, and then I guess maybe at a bare minimum, a hypothermia blanket, one of those space.
Okay. Yeah.
If you have to put a tourniquet on, you need to be covering them with a space blanket to keep, because they'll go into hypothermia. So.
Yeah, that's good. See, I wouldn't have known that, so that's good that you said that. That's awesome. Well, let's shift gears and do our 2 questions we ask every single podcast guest. Right. This is the Green Country Conversations podcast. We want people to understand that. I think it's really important for people to understand that you can do a lot in our area. And I think that our area gets a rap of, it's Northeast Oklahoma, it's boring. So what is your kind of day? What does a perfect day for you look like if you're not working? What do you like to do in Green Country? What do you like to spend time doing?
Me and the boys like going out to, like my boys, we like going out to the beach that's at the lake.
That's awesome.
What
lake?
Fort Gibson.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, we like to go to like museums, and we went to last year, we might do it again this year. We went to Honey Springs Battlefield.
Okay.
Which is about an hour south of here, it was
super
cool. And that's,
What's a museum that you've been to in the area that you maybe was like surprising that you were like, I didn't expect to enjoy this much, but I did.
Well, my youngest definitely likes the military museum that's in the Rose
Okay,
in Broken Arrow.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
See, I've never even been in there, so that's cool.
Every
That's a
time
good
we go-
recommendation.
Every time we go there, he wants to go there.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
You're like, bud, we've been 20
Yeah.
times. We're not going to go again. That's funny. So what's one place in Green Country that you feel like more people should know about? A recommendation of a restaurant or, an event place that you like to go to? Like, what's something you like that you feel like it needs more shine?
Well, one thing that I know I look forward to it is the Red Fern Festival, which is coming up
Okay.
month. And so we like going on Friday because it's not as busy. So even me saying that,
Yeah.
I don't think it will. People will still probably go on Saturday because people
Yeah.
work. But yeah, we like going to the
It's inevitable.
But yeah, we like going on Fridays, and it's a little.
Where's the Red Fern Festival at?
It's downtown Tahlequah.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. And is it like just they have community kind of outreach? They have food. What all happens at the Red Fern Festival?
Yeah, so it's they have like a 5K race. They'll have like they've done it. Everybody will bring their coonhounds and do like
That's fun.
competition, and they have like vendors and stuff set up downtown, and
Yeah.
games. There'll be bouncy houses and all sorts of stuff
Fun.
there. Yeah, but
That sounds fun. Yeah.
it's definitely a
Man, you've given 3 recommendations that I've never been to, never heard of, so I'll write them down on my list. That's good stuff, man. I appreciate that.
the end of April, I think, is when it's coming up. So
Okay, awesome. That's super fun. So let me tell our listeners how they can connect with you and your business, and what's the best way to get in front of you and maybe get some more information about your services.
yeah, LegionSecuritySolutions.com, and the email is Andrew@LegionSecuritySolutions.com. But if you go to the website, you'll be able to find the email. And if any church that wants any of these services, residents, if you're worried about it, everybody's kind of vulnerable, but not everybody's going to look at getting a vulnerability assessment for their home. But
Yeah.
and then schools, especially private schools, if you're feeling left behind or whatever, if you need advice, like I said, I work with Stratasite too, and that is a pretty big platform to help get the plan together. So, and I'm willing to work with whoever because I can't do everything for free, but really about helping people,
Yeah.
and getting people a little bit safer. So
That's amazing. That's amazing, Andrew. Well, I appreciate the conversation, guys. If you got a piece of advice or knowledge from this, give us a like, give us a subscribe to the channel. Reach out to Andrew for all your security needs, and we'll catch you guys on the next episode.